Welcome, everyone. My name is Andrew Gelfuso. I'm the director of the World Trade Center, Washington, D.C. Today, you've joined us for our Pandemic Perspectives on Trade, a conversation with Georgi Tsikolia, Deputy Chief of Mission for the Embassy of Georgia. We're here with Nelson Garcia as well from WIPG, Washington Intergovernmental Professionals Group. The World Trade Center, D.C. is the programming arm of the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. We host policy forums, trade missions, business briefings, and trade shows. When COVID passes, we're very excited to welcome you all back here to the nation's official trade center, the Ronald Reagan Building. When COVID hit us in mid-March, we embarked on a Messages of Hope campaign, where we facilitated messages from 48 ambassadors to the people of the U.S. with uplifting and inspirational messages. I'd encourage you to view these messages on our website, which is rrbitc.com. The World Trade Center DC is part of the nonpartisan, apolitical World Trade Center Association, which has 300 licenses in over 90 countries around the world. We're very pleased to once again partner today with the Washington Intergovernmental Professional Group, or WIPG. For the past 3 years, we've worked together to bring in members of Congress and diplomats to the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center for intimate and candid discussions on economics, tourism, trade, and more. Now I'd like to turn it to Nelson Garcia to introduce today's esteemed guest.
Thank you, Andrew. My name is Nelson Garcia, and I'm the founder and president of the Washington Intergovernmental Professional Group. And we would like to take this opportunity to thank very much Andrew Gelfuso and his team, Allison McKiffin, over at the World Trade Center in Washington, D.C., without whom we could not be putting these events together. As Andrew mentioned earlier, we usually do these events live here at the Ronald Reagan Building, where we've had an opportunity to host newly arrived ambassadors, as well as newly elected members of Congress, who are members of the key committees of jurisdiction that handle foreign affairs and trade. And we hope to do that again pretty soon, beginning of next year. Meanwhile, while we wait for that to happen, we are in the process of continuing these series of webinars in the hopes of introducing these members of Congress, as well as ambassadors and their diplomats, to key policymakers here in Washington, D.C. And we thank each and every one of you for participating in this afternoon's session. With that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce a dear friend of ours, Georgi Tsikolia, who was appointed Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of Georgia to the United States in August of 2015. From October 2016 until January 2017, Mr. Tsikolia served as Chargé d'Affaires at the embassy. As a DCM, Mr. Tsikolia is responsible for the daily operations of the embassy, the largest Georgian diplomatic mission in the world. Supporting the ambassador, Mr. Tsikolia manages economic, political, public relations, and administrative teams, leading engagement to U.S. business community, administration, members of Congress, and academia. Prior to his posting, he was the CEO of Enterprise Georgia, the Georgian Entrepreneurship Development Agency. As CEO of Enterprise Georgia, Mr. Tsikolia was responsible for the establishment of the first major government institution mandated to facilitate private sector development through a variety of financial and technical support mechanisms, as well as export support. In addition to overseeing the agency's daily activities, Mr. Tsikolia played a critical role in introducing and developing the government initiative Produce in Georgia, aimed at supporting SMEs and export-oriented companies. To date, under the initiative, $350 million of private investments went to the Georgian economy, and 13,000 jobs were created. From 2011 until 2014, Mr. Tsikolia worked as the first deputy CEO at Invest in Georgia, the Georgian National Investment Agency, the nation's main state investment promotion arm, and as a director of investment and export policy at Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development. During his tenure at Invest in Georgia, $120 million of foreign direct investments were committed to various industries across the Georgian economy. Prior to entering public service, Mr. Tsikolia worked as a CEO at a number of startups and lead sales and marketing teams in multiple industries. Mr. Tsikolia earned a master's degree in international relations from Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. He holds a bachelor's degree in international economic relations from Moscow State Open University and a business administration diploma from British Columbia Institute of Technology. In addition to his native Georgian, Mr. Tsikolia is fluent in English and Russian. He is married and has 3 children. And with that, would like to welcome and thank again Mr. Georgi Tsikolia.
Thank you, Nelson. Kelly, thank you for having me. Thank you for such a comprehensive presentation of my background. My whole life flashed in front of me. Went through different phases of my career as well, and a lot of good memories related to the past experience. And of course, a lot of good memories related to our cooperation with the World Trade Center, of course, in particular, and with you all. And we're always happy to participate. We're always happy to join, especially in these uneasy times when, of course, we all have to stay connected, find the ways of staying connected, and find the ways of discussing the ideas that evolve around us. So once again, thank you for having me over. Thank you to Alison, thank you to Andrew, and of course to you, Nelson, for arranging that. Well, when we speak of trade and U.S.-Georgia relations, there are a number of the points that I would like to raise and then bring to the attention of the audience. First of all, for the people who are not heavily kind of involved in geopolitics or economy and looking at the trade from the more of a kind of 30,000 feet kind of view, it's always always number of the questions always arise, and one of them is what Georgia itself represents when it comes to U.S. and the importance of the trade for the U.S. In our part of the world, in a specific part of the world. How is the trade between the two countries benefits the workers across the country, and what is the overall dynamic of this process? Well, but before we get to answer those questions, of course, I would definitely like to dedicate a few minutes on describing the region per se, our part of the world, the Black Sea, and importance that part of the world, of course, brings to U.S. and to global trade. And when it comes to global trade, you already mentioned the timings that we live in, and of course, the pandemic that has been evolving around us for the past 6 months or so. Time flies fast. And of course the shocks that came together with the pandemic, and of course global trade, say in the global economy, or the first one that were hit, and then with the outcomes of the pandemic, and the smaller open market economies were the ones that felt it really hard on themselves as well. And when it comes to trade, you would all definitely know those numbers, but I'll repeat it again for some of us in the audience that we've, for the past 20 years, 30 years, have lived in a world that has globalized, and the globalized trade and became a kind of a mainstream in terms of the trade development around us. We saw the global trade evolving in terms of numbers from close to 35-40% of the global GDP to about 60% of global GDP. Huge growth of more than 50% for the past 20 years. In 2008, that number surpassed the number that was before the pre-crisis of 2008. So we all saw the numbers were moving up. We all saw that the countries interacted between each other. The trade was essential for the economic growth. And of course, with the pandemic, all of those countries in the global economy itself and trade was definitely was the first one. And we felt, all of us, that was hit hard. If you look at the OECD outlook, you would see that the numbers for 2020 for this year's are quite negative. And you would see that the global economy collapses close to 13% on a global scale. You will see that the merchandise trade collapse on a global scale between 20 to 25%. So, and those are the huge numbers. Those are the huge numbers that, of course, affect different parts of the world. They will affect the complex value chains in the specific industries, would be electronics, automotive, or the other types of the products. And of course, when it comes to the transport and the transport-related industries, those are the industries that are greatly affected as well. But on a positive side, the same kind of a study showed that 2021, the next year, will bring certain result to this process, and we will see a great and a good growth across the globe, and of course with trade in itself, we will see hopefully a high level of the trade growth in different parts of developing world, especially. Well, when we speak of the developing world, Georgia, of course, is a developing country. Georgia is a small market-based economy located on the coast of the Black Sea, at the intersection of the largest Eurasian markets, on the European Union on one hand, and Central Asia, and further down China on the other hand. We're a littoral country, as I've mentioned, located on the Black Sea coast, having a number of the ports, and of course together with the ports infrastructure that allows us to be an interlocutor between the two largest markets. And when we look at the Black Sea overall, you would see that the Black Sea and the growth in the Black Sea for the past decade has been increasing as well, and increasing at the quite interesting rate. You look at the Georgia, it was in 2019, the increase in terms of the trade with its railroad or the freight was close to 10 to 11%, and you see that the maritime trade in itself was increase of close to 20%. And that in itself, of course, showed that the increasing role that the Georgian played in connecting the different large markets of the region. And when we talk of the markets of the region, just for the observation, in the surrounding areas of Georgia and the European Union side, of course, on the Central Asian side, and including then you go down again as China, you see the markets of the closer to 2 billion people that are being served, that have a potential of being served through Georgia. Why is that of interest to the United States? What is the United States vested interest in our part of the world? And those interests, of course, vary. It starts with the security interests, of course, and they're closely intertwined with the trade interests and economic interests as well. United States has geopolitically been throughout the past decades heavily invested in a wider Black Sea area. At the beginning of the 90s, United States supported the diversification of the energy markets and helping development of the infrastructure that delivered energy from the Caspian Basin to the European market. United States companies participated heavily in that, investing hundreds of millions of dollars in the development of that infrastructure. Until today, that infrastructure serves as an only alternative way of supplying the European Union with an oil and gas alternative to Russia from our part of the world, and that corridor, of course, of supplying that energy lies through Georgia, and the Georgia has played a big role in developing the so-called middle corridor. This is the stretch of the land between Russia on the other side and the Turkey on the other side, on the Caspian Sea that goes through Georgia, that is becoming more vital in terms of the global trade. Moving beyond the 90s, and of course, and then to the 2000s with United States and following the September 11 events, United States looking at the wider region from a different security perspective that were closely related to issues such as logistics, transportation of military equipment as well, and of course of supply to the military contingent that the United States had in different parts of that lie beyond the Caspian Sea, Middle East, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, supplying and of course in connecting them with the European bases. And in that process as well, the existing infrastructure played a huge role, and that shift in itself, of course, brought a larger U.S. presence for the region. That from initial military security partnerships evolved into a business-related partnerships where the private companies follow the suit of the U.S. Army and started looking at the closer to different parts of our part of the world and the different industries in our part of the world as well. So what we have today? What we have today is we have, well, let's say what we had until the beginning of 2020, before the pandemic hit. Before the pandemic hit, we had a high growth in terms of the trade between US and the region. We had an increased interest from different US industries that go beyond energy, such as transport, logistics, such as telecom and others, in investing in South Caucasus, Central Asia and beyond. We had a number of the projects that were underway through Georgia that would increase the U.S. soft presence in the region, and we had the discussions on the policy issues and the related issues that would have cemented this overall process. On other side, we had the European Union with its interest on eastern shore of the southern eastern shore of the Black Sea, and with the specific projects and the policies related to Georgia and the wider region, and especially to Georgia, considering that Georgia has a so-called association agreement with the European Union that allows it to trade and travel inside the EU without any additional restrictions. As a part of the association agreement, we have a free trade agreement with the European Union as well, where the trade of goods and services between the Union and Georgia is conducted without any additional duties. And the free travel, where the visa restrictions for Georgians have been lifted a few years ago, is present as well. And of course, beyond that discussion of number of the initiatives in which the United States is heavily kind of plays a role, and that serve as a part of the European Union's strategy, so-called 4 pillars of the strategy connecting Europe and Asia, would be its development of the transport routes, energy distribution, digital access to the human development. This is all the parts in which Georgia plays an integral part by developing ideas and the projects such as connecting Georgia via Black Sea to European Union, energy connectivity, fiber optic digital connectivity, and of course maritime connectivity as well. And of course, again, involvement in the participation of the United States and the US businesses, and going beyond businesses of the institutions such as former OPEC, now International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, has always been essential. And of course, with the pandemic bringing in so reality and shifting interests in different ways, especially when it comes to the supply chains, now we see that conversation evolving, and not only evolving, but materializing and kind of pushing forward with new ideas, such as economic prosperity initiative that the U.S. government is actively discussing with its partner countries, on the Blue Dot initiative, which relates to the development of the sustainable development of the infrastructure across the globe, and of course in our part of the world as well. So this is where we are. That's how the partnership has evolved. Our partnership that is strategic in nature, and then is strategic in essence, and strategic from the legal perspective as well. We have so-called strategic partnership agreement that we signed with the United States more than a decade ago. Based on this strategic partnership agreement, we discuss all those priority areas of our cooperation on an annual basis. We push forward with the policies and the initiatives related to that partnership. And of course, beyond that, on a daily basis, of course, we have a close communication with different institutions, with different agencies. I mentioned the TFC that has heavily invested in Georgia during the past 2 decades. More than $600 billion of U.S. funds have been invested in Georgia through DFC. More than overall $4.5 billion of U.S. investments have been utilized in Georgia with different means throughout the same period. So you can see the interest, of course, that comes from the U.S. to our part of the world, and especially in Georgia. And of course, when it comes to us, the 2 points that I wanted to mention, I spoke of the open market economy and the reforms that Georgia have been undertaking to become this kind of an outlier in the region for investment and trade. And there are a few specific numbers that I would like to mention that probably would be of interest to the audience. Is that Georgia is the only developing country in a World Economic Index of easiness of doing business in its top 10. It's a great achievement that has been made by Georgia by reforming the state, by reforming the institutions, by pushing forward with the tough initiatives. And by not being afraid to try new things. And when we speak of new things, one of the examples that I wanted to bring of how the innovation has been applied to the daily activities in Georgia, not only the private sector but the public sector, is an initiative. One of the initiatives that Georgia had using the blockchain system and using the blockchain system for the real estate transactions in the country. So based on that change, every real estate transaction in Georgia today is done on a blockchain, which of course adds the security and at the same time, of course, speed of providing the business, providing the services, and efficiency as well. And of course, with that come the recognition. And then in addition to the World Bank, you look at the Heritage Foundation and its index of economies that are considered being free. You would again see that Georgia is in one of the few developing countries that it's in the top 15 countries from the global perspective. And a few days ago, we saw another very notable ranking global of Fraser Institute of Canada, where the Georgia was again in the top 10 of one of the most favorable places to do the business in. So we are changing, we are reforming, we are pushing forward as a small market economy with the reform agendas. We are integrating into the regional and the global markets. And as a country whose economy and the growth of the economy is highly dependent on the global trade, of course, for us, not only the major global shocks, but the regional shocks itself is something that we always try to, if not fully, but to a certain extent, being prepared to, and have to deal and feel the pain trade on a daily basis. And the biggest pain, and from this point that we felt from the pandemic, is one specific industry that I wanted to mention is the tourism industry. Georgia is a regional hub for tourism as well. The population of 4 million of Georgians. Last year, we've received more than 9 million foreign visitors. So that's more than double of the Georgian population that visited Georgia. And you can imagine how important that industry, due to that fact, is for the economy per se. And of course, due to the pandemic this year, we are quite limited. So the drop in terms of the tourism was drastic, more than 92%. But despite that fact, we've still managed to push through. First of all, with dealing with the initial wave of the pandemic. Georgia is considered being one of the success cases when you speak of government's approach towards the pandemic and effects that the pandemic has brought. We were able to reopen the economy in a rather fast manner after drastic measures to shut down and of course and make sure that the population is as safe as possible. And after the reopening of the economy, of course, we're slowly noticing that of course the overall trends internally allow us to see that 2021 will bring back the growth of the economy that we saw pre-pandemic, which was, in terms of the GDP growth, was close to the 5%. That's among the highest in the region. And we saw a few days ago, international financial institutions such as ADB, IMF, of course, at the same time, EBRDs, they all confirmed that the Georgia's growth for 2021, we should be between 4.5 to 5.2%. Which is an encouraging news, of course, as well. And when going back to tourism, as we speak, today till end of the week, Georgia will host the first in-person global meeting of Council General of the Secretariat of the World Tourism Organization. It's a UN organization that deals with the tourism issues on a global scale. And they're holding an in-person meeting in Georgia for the next few days. Cabinet members from across the globe, more than 200 members. Of course, it's still, in terms of the scale, not as we anticipated, but this is an encouraging news to see that some of those examples are bringing us to the business as usual mode, and the people are not only not afraid to travel, but they are willing to conduct the business in a normal manner and in-person meetings in different parts of the world. And the Georgia, of course, I'm happy to underline that has been one of the pioneers in returning to life to the normal process. So this is where we are, and this is the overview that I wanted to give, and I'd be more than happy to discuss specific questions and the issues that would be of interest.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tsikolia. I appreciate that very much in terms of your rundown of our relationship between the two countries. At this time, I would like to remind those who are from the audience who would like to submit a question. There is a link at the bottom of your screen. I believe it's in the bottom of the screen that will allow you to ask questions. Please feel free to do so, and we'll ask them for you throughout the program. Andrew, would you like to start off our round of questioning at this time? Nope, I think you're on mute.
Here we go. Am I unmuted? Perfect.
Yeah.
It'd be a pleasure to start this off. In the COVID-19 era, how does a U.S. business, a small mid-sized business, find a Georgian trading partner?
That's a very interesting question, and to which probably there is no one single answer, considering that we're still going through this process of pandemic. We're still kind of battling through, and despite the fact that the end is in a clear sight, hopefully to all of us, there is still time ahead of us to do certain things and deal with the shocks and aftershocks of the pandemic. On an overall basis, when it comes to U.S. small and medium businesses, and I wanted to underline one specific issue. If you look at the investments and the dealings of the U.S. businesses in Georgia, you will see that the 90% of the businesses is small and medium businesses, which is very encouraging. And this has always been a sign that U.S. businesses that are looking outwards for the investment, for development, for the new markets, for those businesses, Georgia is of particular interest. And we're very encouraged to see that the financial institutions such as venture funds, such as private equity funds, that have been able to bring the finances from the U.S. and the financing from U.S. Those types of institutions have been active in Georgia and are financing the businesses that have a connection to the two countries. There are a few of those investment funds with the backing of the U.S. financial industry that are active in Georgia, with a portfolio of amounting close to $100 and $120 million, and for the most part, financing the small and medium businesses. So all of that was very encouraging, and I'm sure that once we are past this pandemic, we will see an increase, even through the increase of the U.S. private and especially SME industry towards our part of the world, and Georgia in specific.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. Before I ask my question, Mr. Tsikolia, I just wanted to mention that one of our members of WIPG is the president of the Government Blockchain Association based here in Washington, D.C., and they are having a conference early next year, March 25 to 26, a conference titled "The Future of Money, Governance, and the Law," and I'll make sure that your office gets a copy of that invitation. Hopefully that you can participate in that as well, since you mentioned the issue. The question I have deals with the surrounding countries that may impact the trade, your ability to trade with other countries around the world. Obviously, with the situation in Belarus happening, that is creating a little bit of a problem in your border. Has that issue impacted your ability to trade with Europe and in particular with the United States in terms of what's been happening in that country?
The simple answer probably would be no, but at the same time, there is nothing simple that takes place in our parts of the world, especially when it comes to trade and the relations between the countries. As you probably know well, and for those in the audience who might not be aware of that, we internally in Georgia, unfortunately for more than a decade now, on a daily basis, have been dealing with an existential threat that unfortunately has been persistent due to the ongoing Russian occupation of 20% of the Georgian territories. After the invasion of 2008, Russia still occupies 2 regions of Georgia. One of those regions located 40 miles away from the capital. So you can imagine the reality under which Georgia has to persevere and push forward. And the reason I've mentioned that is that despite that ongoing threat and ongoing aggression that the state faces, we've been able to push through. We've decided for ourselves that Russia will not define our future. We will define our future ourselves. And that future is closely aligned with European values, development, democracy, rule of law, and etc. And this is the path that we have chosen, and this is the path through which we are pushing through the hardships such as occupation and the tough geopolitical reality that surrounds us. So we are, in this case, in certain cases, in our DNA is always dealing with the hardships that come from different political or geopolitical issues in our part of the world. But at the same time, we look at the certain things that take place in the world from the opportunity perspective. And of course, when I speak of large markets, when I speak of geography, when I speak of connecting different parts of the world and being open to the world in terms of trade, we look at it as an opportunity. Of course, an opportunity of integrating Georgia to the larger extent to the global markets and being integrated with the West and Europe in specifics. And when we speak of Europe, our trade with Europe, for the most part, takes place either with Turkey, so a strategic partner, close friend, and an important trading partner as well, all Black Sea, directly with the European Union. And I did mention some of the initiatives that we have in regards to the Black Sea to further connect Georgia directly to the western shore of the Black Sea, Romania in particular, and Bulgaria as well. Would be its projects in terms of the energy and or the electricity generation, would be its digital connectivity, or transport related initiatives. And of course, we are pushing through with all those initiatives and in parallel, of course, as I mentioned, based on our association agreement with the European Union, we are pushing through the additional reforms in Georgia to strengthen our institutions, to strengthen the Georgian institutional capacity and bring it in line with requirements that the European Union has, to the point where we'll be fully aligned with the EU requirements. And again, with our final goal becoming the member of the European Union and becoming the member of the NATO as well. So yeah, this is where we are despite the challenges. I mentioned 2008. after 2008. So regionally, we saw a huge challenge in 2014 as well, with another Russian aggression towards Ukraine, Crimea, and then following military crisis on the eastern side of Ukraine. And that, of course, in terms of the economic development of the region, was a huge challenge as well. Despite the fact that that specific part of our region is located, it's not located in the proximity to Georgia. It's 700-800 miles from Georgian border, and even longer than that. Still, for the global investor, when it looks at the region, when it assesses the long-term and the mid-term perspective, so the region, from the security perspective, investors in the large companies, they always look at the large picture and what the large kind of security implications could that region or that picture present. And again, of course, I mean, our response to that, in addition to of course what I have mentioned in terms of the reforms, is always staying positive and staying active and bringing the message to the private sector of the world that we are not only open for business, but we're safe and sound environment where investors in the long run can feel and not only protected, but can feel confident that their businesses not only will be protected, but their businesses will flourish and develop further.
Thank you, Mr. Tsikolia. Andrew?
Mr. Tsikolia, I was wondering what impact, if any, do the current trade tensions between China and the United States have in your country?
Sure. Again, some of the geopolitical, let's say, experts throughout the past 22 decades have announced that the history of the geography is dead or doesn't matter anymore. But contrary to that, we kind of for the past few years especially have once again been reminded of how important the geography and the history is. And in regards to Georgia, of course, geography is of crucial importance. And when we speak of that crucial importance, it's importance not only to Georgia, but the countries that surround us as well. And in this case, for China. China is, as we all know, is looking towards expanding the trade relations across the globe with specific interests for the specific parts of the world. And of course, for China, they have a specific interest when it comes to the Central Asia and when it comes to the Eastern Europe. And both of those regions border Georgia. And of course, in that light, partnership with Georgia and vis-a-vis Georgian partnership with China is something that has been not only on agenda, but has been a topic of the conversation throughout the past decade. We are one of the few countries in our region that has a free trade agreement with China, and probably one of the few countries in the world that, together with the free trade agreement with China, has a free trade agreement with the European Union. So on both sides of the market, of course, we try to make sure that the access to those markets is open to Georgian companies, so the companies that operate for Georgia. And of course, our relationship with the United States on the trade side, I mean, on overall side, as I've mentioned, the US is our main strategic ally, the number one partner to Georgia in many aspects. And in regards to the trade, we are pushing forward with ideas, among them free trade agreement between US and Georgia. We have great trade relationship. We have a so-called GSP agreement between US and Georgia that allows Georgia to export thousands of products to the US market and vice versa. The trade balance has always been in favor of the United States, and we're totally fine with that, and we would like to increase the trade as well. We have a number of the platforms that help us build the trade relationship, so-called high-level trade dialogue between USTR, US agency responsible for the trade, and Georgian line ministries. So we have a really good working relationship and to push forward with FTA between Georgia and the United States. And of course, we see a great support towards that idea across the different institutions in US, whether it's legislative or the executive branch On the legislative side, Congress, House passed a bill last September, so-called Georgia Support Act, the first bill dedicated solely to Georgia. The part of that bill has a language on FTA and encourages USTR to start an FTA with a strong US partner and ally, Georgia. So this is the conversation that we have with US, and of course at the same time we have a good working relationship and a good world trade relationship with China as well. In terms of the effect, I mean, we do not see in specific that effect. I mean, we are trade-wise, trade between China and Europe has been growing. In Georgia, when we looked at, there is, in terms of the major, let's say, infrastructural projects, there has never been a Chinese investments in specifics. There always was and is US investments in infrastructure, would be public or the private infrastructure. We never engaged with China on a financial discussions. We have no debt that is related to China. So for us, this is something that is, of course, something that we always pay close attention to, but something that we think Georgia can play a positive role in instead of that becoming an issue in the long run.
Thank you so much. Nelson.
Thank you. Okay, last question from my end. Mr. Tsikolia, the U.S. State Department recently published a report praising the sweeping economic reforms that your country has undertaken since 1991 that have produced a relatively well-functioning and stable market economy. Can you please expand a little bit on what other reform proposals that your country may be undertaking in the horizon, especially with regards to, let's say, tax reforms or transparency reforms that a lot of countries around the world are currently working on? Are there any other reform proposals that your country is currently doing that you would like to talk about?
Sure, and I wanted to thank you for mentioning that report. Yes, we were quite happy to see that report and the language that was that's in that report. That's again, it's one additional recognition of the process and the progress that Georgia has made. And you mentioned one part of that report. If you go throughout the different kind of parts of the report, you will see that in every aspect, would be it's in a rule of law issue, democracy issue, the progress on moving towards the European Union and reforming the country, or the bilateral partnership that is a great recognition towards what Georgia has done. And of course, when we speak of specific initiatives that we are undergoing in Georgia, for the most part, a lot of those initiatives are the initiatives that we're developing together with our partners in the United States, and we're pushing forward through those initiatives. Beyond that, of course, on a nationwide, I would like to highlight a number of the initiatives that we have to make sure that the Georgia further accelerates its development and at the same time keeps being competitive in this post-pandemic world. In terms of the tax reform, the largest reform that we had in regards to taxes was conducted last year. This relates to the reform of the corporate income tax. Georgia overall is has a liberal approach towards taxation. Companies in Georgia, due to the only few taxes in terms of the tax burden on the business, Georgia again would be in probably in a list of top 20 countries in the world, if not top 10. There are only 5 taxes in Georgia. They're easy to manage. They're easy to deal with. Most of them are flat. Let's say personal income tax, VAT, similar to the sales taxes in US. And the corporate income tax. They're all flat. And in terms of the corporate income tax, the latest change that we had is we've reformed the tax in a way that it is partially abolished fully, as long as the companies reinvest revenues into the business. So the corporate income tax is 15% flat, but if at the end of the year, fiscal year, company decides to reinvest its revenue, they are exempt from paying the corporate income tax, which again was a quite a successful reform. We saw the boost in reinvesting into the business, capital expenditures on behalf of the companies, new business developments, technology upgrades, and etc. So that they provided the liquidity to the companies to reinvest and to push forward with the development. And we were happy to see that was yielding the quite positive results. And I did mention 5% growth of economy. We were expecting go above 5%. But again, pandemic kind of course, brought its own realities. But we're happy to see that starting 2021, us together with other IFIs, we all have a positive outlook on what the Georgian economy looks like and how we can deal with the pandemic. And of course, beyond that reform, the overall reform of the capital market reform, as with many small market economies, access to finance has always been an issue, especially for SMEs. Even in larger economies, SMEs face a tough time in accessing to finance, and getting access to finance in the small markets is always an issue. And of course, development of the capital market is a great way of helping SMEs as well. And this is what we've been doing. This is what we've been doing with our partners across the industries, and bringing the new initiatives, bringing the new products to help the development of the capital market, and which I'm sure which will yield these results as well. And some of those results you can see in numbers as well. Among them, the participation of the SME in overall economy has increased through the level of the unemployment, and employment in SMEs has increased through there as well. Their investments in terms of the innovation and the new technology has increased as well. So those numbers and those increases are quite visible, and we see that as well. And then of course, there is one initiative that I wanted to underline that is underway right now due to the pandemic. First, we all had to innovate, and the few of the initiatives that we have that are quite new in its scope and nature. One is related to the relative success that Georgia had in dealing with the pandemic. So we started the program that allows citizens of different countries around the globe and to come to Georgia, go through the certain protocol of entering the country, quarantining and etc., which won't take between 7 to 10 days max, and then staying in Georgia for the next 6 to 12 months. And working from Georgia, living in Georgia, spending the winter in Georgia without any need would be for visas, work permits, or any other restrictions. So for people and the freelancers and the people who work remotely, for them that became a huge, of course, of huge interest, and we saw thousands of applicants rushing to Georgia since that initiative has been put forward. Beyond that, of course, we are outreaching to the global companies that have supply routes and supply chains in our part of the world, with our investment agency, Ministry of Economies, and other institutions that are tasked in dealing with that on a daily basis, reaching out to the companies, trying to find out the specific needs when it comes to supply routes, when it comes to the specific transport needs and their development goals, and offering specific opportunities in Georgia to allow them to localize their businesses in Georgia. And we've seen a great success in that as well, with a number of the cases where the large companies, especially in the outsourcing industry, have looked at Georgia and have decided to establish their presence there as well. So despite the challenges of the pandemic, I mean, we have to push through, we have to persevere, And I think with more innovation and with ideas that I've just mentioned, some of the ideas, we'll be able to do so in a rather successful way.
Well, thank you, Mr. Tsikolia. And before I hand it off to Andrew for the closing, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you very much on behalf of the Washington Intergovernmental Professional Group for taking some of your valuable time to do this webinar with us this afternoon. With that, thank you again, and thank you to the World Trade Center of Washington, D.C. And I'll go ahead and hand it off to Andrew at this time for closing.
Thank you.
Mr. Tsikolia, our viewers, thank you all for your time. Thank you, sir, for your thoughtful and informed comments. Maybe we'll see a bilateral trade agreement in our future. And I look forward to working with you in Washington, D.C. So thank you very much. That brings our webinar to a close, and we'll see you all at the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.